I've decided, if you haven't figured it out, that I'm not going to really be politically correct tonight. I'll do it with love, but I'm going to tell the truth. And now that these are so violently connected, now we come to the next one. We come to media. So let's go to that slide, part 6. So just before we move on, let's understand what media is. The mountain of media is acknowledged as the main source of information in the entire world. And media has the power to sway viewpoints to match a viewpoint. It has the power to sway viewpoints to match a viewpoint. And modern day media, sadly, is mostly dishonest with lack of integrity. But I can tell you where's a good one: Christian Broadcasting Network. I had the pleasure and the privilege and the honor of working there. If you want some good news, go to the Christian Broadcasting Network. But you know, media, what do? I call it propaganda. That's the word. We thought, well, that's just, a fun little word or a silly little word. But that's really what's happening. And propaganda and dishonesty goes all the way. I trace it. I'm sure it goes farther. I mean, it goes back to, Cain and Abel, when God said, where's your brother? And he said, I don't know, I'm not his keeper. But I want to go back 2,000 years ago when Jesus raised from the grave. And the biggest propaganda story of our lifetime. They can't even compare to it today, which people still believe. 2,000 years ago, this epic day, Jesus rose from the grave, and the first people that saw him were the ladies. And he said, go tell my brothers, the disciples, and your followers, go tell them that I've risen. See, he spoke for 3 years, and it got worse and worse and worse for him because they were so jealous and so angry. And the message of Jesus did not fit their plan. So the Jewish religious leaders and the Roman soldiers, they couldn't take it anymore because he threatened everything, every power, every strategy they ever had. So they had to kill him. But Jesus rose on that third day, just like he said he would, and said, go tell my followers. And he stayed for 40 days and showed himself over and over again before he was ascended into heaven, where about 500 people saw him. The Roman soldiers, the story that I'm going to tell, we're going to read about in a second, the story that they told is not what happened at all. They actually saw the angel come roll the stone away, and they freaked out and passed out. I might freak out and pass out too, even though that's so cool. Sometimes I'm like, Lord, I want to see you. I want to see an angel. And then I'm like, well, do I really? Because I don't know. I want to, but do I? And, I can imagine they're like, whoa. But they went into the city and they told their leaders, they said, listen, he rose from the grave just like he said he did. And we've got a problem because this is not the narrative we are supposed to be in agreement with. So the religious Jewish leaders who were completely in hate mode over Jesus because he was the real deal, and they weren't. They said, look, we're going to make up a story, and you're going to go back and tell it, and we're going to rewrite this narrative with this propaganda. So they bribed the soldiers and said, go tell them that you were asleep, you accidentally fell asleep, and they stole the body, and that will take care of it. And then we'll tell the Roman government that would wring your neck for this, we'll tell them you fell asleep, we'll cover your tracks. Do you see how one lie leads to another lie, leads to another lie, to another lie, and all these people get involved? And so that was supposed to disrupt the false narrative, or the true narrative. So as they went along, they were bribed to tell this big lie. And it says in Matthew, which we're about to read, this is Matthew writes, chapter 28, around 30 years after Jesus has resurrected, and Matthew's frustrated at the end. He says, people still do not believe because they lied. So let's look at it. It's Matthew 28, 11 through 15. As the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and told the leading priests what had happened. Verse 12, a meeting with the elders was called, and they decided to give the soldiers a large bribe. They told the soldiers, quote, you must say Jesus' disciples came during the night while you were sleeping, and that they stole his body. And if the governor hears about it, we'll stand up for you so that you won't get in trouble. So the guards accepted the bribe and said what they were told to say. Their story spread widely among the Jews, and they still tell it today. There were two stories. There was a story of truth and hope. Jesus has risen from the grave, and hope is alive. And you can follow him with hope and truth. The second story was propaganda, lies and hopelessness. Oh, he might have been a good prophet, but maybe not. But we thought he was disturbing, so we'd rather kill him than Barabbas. How quickly a narrative can be changed to represent whatever someone wants to. And sadly, those people didn't do enough research to know what the truth was and what the lie was. So the bottom line, either Jesus raised from the dead or Jesus never breathed again. But that's the difference, the thin line of threading the needle between life and death, even those that believe Jesus. It's also backed up in 1 Corinthians 15:14 through 20 and John 3:16 through 18. So what is truth and what is propaganda? The definition of truth is that which is true in accordance with fact or reality. Propaganda, I call a lie. This is the definition: information, especially of a bias or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. I know we know what it is, but I think it's good to know exactly what they say it is. Fast forward now to the 20th century, and I'm just using 3 examples. I could have literally gone all day long. Fast forward to the 20th century, and we have Lenin, Mussolini, and Hitler. Lenin representing the Russian government and the Russian population, and then Stalin, Mussolini, Italy, and Hitler, Germany. I was going to do this without Lenin. I was going to go on and do Stalin, and my computer, things kept bumping me out, and this one particular story in this article just kept coming up, and finally I'm like, Lord, do you want me to see something? And he did. And here's what I want to show you: the strategy with the 6 different points that Lenin used to turn into totalitarianism into his country. So propaganda in the 20th century began with these dictators and totalitarians. They ruled the entire government, maintained complete control over every single public and private part of every single person's life and every citizen in their country. It started with an economic problem right before World War I, and everybody was panicking. It's easy to panic over money. It's not easy, especially when things aren't going well. So they began to use this propaganda, and they said, well, let's just convince all of our followers, the people in our country that we know best, follow us. We're going to take care of you. And so World War I resulted really because of depression in every country, including ours. And it led people to question the democratic process. I'm trying to say this correctly. And that they thought maybe it would not improve their lives. So the totalitarian leaders appeared to provide a sense of security and offer a strong direction for their future. Well, here's the thing, is nobody knows my future but me and God. And my counselor and I can talk. But when somebody's trying to tell me everything I'm going to do, I don't think so. The dictators only allow one political party, and they denied many individual rights. Police terrorized people and used control to get rid of any opposition. And they used newspapers, television, and radio with extreme propaganda and limited reports to help influence all the people. They controlled everything. During the 1920s and 1930s, there were 4 major totalitarian government leaders. One was communist, the other 3 were fascist. It doesn't really matter. It's all bad. The first one was the Soviet Union. It's Vladimir Lenin. Vladimir Lenin wrote this. These are his words. I'm going to tell you his words, not mine. He wrote 6 principles of propaganda that he used to consolidate power. He said, these are the 6 principles of propaganda I will use to consolidate power. Number 1, the end will justify the means. What does that mean? Whatever you do, do it, win no matter what. The end justifies the means. Has anybody ever heard that before? It seems like after he was conquered, we shouldn't ever hear that again. But we do. Number 2, the firstest with the mostest. It means basically to lie about everything that is really true. To lie and lie and lie till you're blue in the face. The third thing, never let a crisis go to waste. Put the competition in crisis mode constantly. Fourthly, demonization. This is Lenin's word. Cause and call out all your opposition as bloodsuckers, insects, spiders, leeches, and vampires. We're called a lot of things today too. Christians. Number 5, propaganda. Use it for examples. Do public hangings. Do public shootings. Use material to force Russians into submission. Target churches and the destruction of churches. Take the Russian peasants that go to church and believe and target the leaders of the churches. Target the sacred objects and loot them and the relics of the saints and toss them in the dirt and then shoot the priests. That's in his manifesto here. And number 6, blame your predecessor. He would blame the czar that went before him. Blame, blame, blame. The second totalitarian leader was Mussolini. He was brilliant with young people. That's where he really shined. In the early 1920s, Italy was struggling economically and politically, and Mussolini had a fascist party that fought the Communist Party, and they won. Whatever. It's all the same. He used radio the most. That became his major tool of propaganda. And he would broadcast these open-air speeches and use it as an instrument mostly as propaganda for the youth. Here is his slogan to the youth: believe, obey. Then fast forward, we have number 3, Adolf Hitler. As a younger man, he was he wasn't accomplished, but he was talented, an artist. I mean, whether you like it or not, he did have a talent for art. So he understood how to communicate, especially his age group, through media, through art. So these are some of the Nazi propaganda that they created. The Nazis, under the leadership of Hitler, were skilled propagandists who were very sophisticated in advertising techniques, the most. And the most current technology to spread the messages. They were the top of the top. They were just like they do with cars. I mean, they are very creative. Hitler actually created this. I want you to listen to this and see if this rings a bell. He created a ministry of public enlightenment and propaganda. A ministry of public enlightenment and propaganda. Does any of this sound familiar? After the Nazis came into power in 1933, Hitler established the Reich Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda specifically to shape German political opinion and behavior. He was smart. He's like, nobody's going to like me. I'm this nerd. I've never been liked. I'm a recluse. I have to use propaganda to get people to like me. He hired a man named Joseph Goebbels. And Goebbels was even more talented than Hitler at propaganda. And so the propaganda and the Nazi government played an integral role in advancing persecution and unlimiting the destruction of the European Jews. They said they want to incite hatred and a climate of indifference so that the fate of the Jews, they'll be numb over the fate of the Jews. If they can do that, they'll be numb. They use posters, they use comics, they use articles, essays, films, and arts and exhibitions. One of the pro-Nazi newspapers was probably the leading one. Like here it will be Dallas Morning News, not so much anymore, New York Times, whatever, with all those now. Don't read those anymore. But their newspaper that went throughout the country was called Der Stürmer. The English translation is The Attacker. It frequently read comics and cartoons depicting Jews as dangerous subhumans. And it talked to them about, they stirred hate. They even put it in books. The German government said for everyone to bring out, I love books, I love to read, bring out all the books and anything that does not have propaganda that they do not believe is correct. They had to burn the books. They had to burn everything. Did you guys ever see the Book Thief movie? Incredible. If you want to understand what happened in that time, it's very clean, very good. They made them burn all their books. Well, Joseph Goebbels, he's speaking here in 1932 at a rally next to Hitler. He was brilliant at propaganda. And both of these men wrote books. Hitler's book is Mein Kampf. In English, it says My Struggle. We're talking a very, very sick person. And Joseph Goebbels wrote a book called Der Angriff. Translation, The Assault. In his book, he wrote this, and he's known for saying this: accuse the other side of that which you are guilty of. Hitler said in his book, quote, from Mein Kampf, Propaganda tries to force a doctrine on the whole people. Propaganda works on the general public from the standpoint of an idea and then makes them ripe for the victory of the idea. Hitler was hunted down, and right before they could find him and his girlfriend, they took their lives. So they put Joseph Goebbels in his place as the leader, but he only lasted one day before he took his children's lives, and then he and his wife committed suicide. Isaiah 5:20 says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." But the problem I realize is that all throughout history, I could have written a whole series on this for the next year, Christians have acquiesced. Christians are the largest group of people in the world. And when we stand up and do the right thing, we can accomplish anything. God has intended for us to be the leaders of every sphere of influence, every one of those mountains. What does the word acquiesce mean? Let's look at it. Let's see, did we do this verse here? I've got these backwards. Let's do this. Acquiesce. The definition of acquiesce, to accept something reluctantly but with protest. To accept, that's the word, something reluctantly but without protest. To go to a sheep as a slaughter. I thought about it. Let's see, what is this? We're going to come back to that. That's out of order. I thought about it, and I thought way back last September when I told the story of the Russian leaders back in the time of Lenin, when they were meeting for 10 days. All the Russian religious leaders were meeting 5 blocks away from Lenin and the Bolshevik party that were gaining power. And on the 10th day, when Lenin and the Bolshevik party took over and communists became the ruling religion, the religious leaders spent 10 or 11 hours fighting over the color of their robes. Fast forward to World War II, the Holocaust. How many Christians acquiesced over that? Some didn't. Bonhoeffer's a hero. Corrie ten Boom's a hero. But how many Christians stood back and said, I don't want to be a part of it, out of fear? Where millions were murdered for prejudice. Then fast forward to the late 60s when a woman that wasn't even born in this country had come over and she said, "Hey, I don't want prayer in school anymore. This is not going to happen over here." And some really bad Supreme Court justices went along with it. One in particular went along with it and pushed it through. It took several years. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And it would go back and forth, back and forth. But at the end of the day, prayer was out of schools, which should have never happened. Why did it happen? Because Christians acquiesced. In March of 2020, we had what they call a shutdown, 2 weeks to not, to not let it spread. Did you know? Now, we don't realize this because we're in Texas, but factually spoken, 40% of churches across the country never opened again or are still doing things online and not meeting. I've learned very quickly I want to be with my friends. I want to be with people. How am I going to be encouraged if I'm just sitting there looking at the TV? We've got to be together. We've got to be together. There are just a few more modern examples, and I pray that this is enough to put light of fire under your feet and to my feet, that we never, ever let this happen again. I'm going to come back to this scripture, Luke 19:13. Jesus is giving a story. He's trying to let them know, the disciples and his followers, that he's coming back, that he's going away and then he'll come back. And they can't wrap their head around, and who could, that we're still waiting 2,000 years, but he's coming. He's coming. But he was trying to prepare them and give them some hope and trying to tell them, he was passing the baton for you guys to keep going. And he uses a story, and I want to read this story with you here quickly to kind of explain it. It's Luke 19:11-13. Jesus is saying, don't drop the ball when I'm gone. You are my extended hands and feet. Luke 19:11-13 says, and they heard these things. And Jesus added and spake a parable, because he was nigh to Jerusalem, and because they thought that the kingdom of God should immediately appear. he said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said to them, occupy until I come. That's about 3 months' wages. Jesus says to them, he says to the disciples, occupy till I come. What does occupy mean? Lead, influence, carry on what I'm doing and be an impact. That was a mandate Jesus gave the disciples, and we're his modern day disciples, that we are to occupy. Some people say, well, it's too late. That it says occupy until I come, not when I come. Not when I come. Occupy until I come. That's our mandate that we must work on and start occupying again. I told you at the beginning, the word remnant is like screaming in my head. It's screaming in my head. I want to be part of the remnant. I have a dream job of a lifetime. I love what I do. I love my life. I've never been so happy. I've never been so exhausted, but so happy because of what I get to do. But I'm telling you, I can't get to this next revival fast enough. I can't get there fast enough. I can't let it come fast enough. And we've got to be prepared for it, because when it happens, you're not going to be in the middle of it if we're not prepared for it. So how do we hear the voice of God? We can listen to the truth, or we can listen to propaganda. And listen, everything is again. Walk out here. I told you, just look around. There will be nothing about God as we look around. How do we hear God? We hear it just like Samuel did. Samuel's 12 years old. His mother has given him to Eli to be in the temple, to be instructed by Eli. Eli's an evil man. Samuel is a good, anointed little man. He hears this word, Samuel, Samuel, when he's sleeping. So he runs to Eli and says, yes, sir, how can I help you? Eli says, I didn't call you. Go back. So then he hears Samuel, Samuel again. He goes and says, yes, sir, how can I help you? I didn't call you. Go back. The third time, Samuel, Samuel. Eli, did I hear you? I heard my name. And finally, this man who was not living for God, even he understood that God was speaking. Go back, get in your bed. And when you hear your name again, say, speak, I'm listening. So do you know what I do more than anything every day these last 2 years? I mean, this last year especially. I say, speak, Lord, I'm listening. In the King James Version, it says, let's find it here. If I skipped, in the King James Version, it says, speak, Lord, your servant heareth. The message is to speak, I'm listening. One day I might be able to tell, maybe I won't. God and I'm single, so we have a lot of really cool secrets. And in the last month, we've had some really cool times together. I've seen him direct me and speak to me in ways maybe more than ever before. I want to cry. And it's not because I'm spending massive time. It's because I said, speak, Lord, I'm listening. I'm listening, and I'm seeing his hand protect me and show me what to do. We say, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. We need to realize that a lot of this is noise. My friend Orlando Salazar taught me this, and so I'm going to give him credit for it. He said there's 3 types of news. There's the world's news, there's fake news, and there's God's news. Speak, Lord, I'm listening. What's God's news? It's in the gospel, inspired by one true God. It tells you the future, it tells you the truth, and it's 100% accurate. We need to be the leaders God has called us to be. We need to be the influencers God has called us to be. What is an influencer? A person that has the ability to move people towards God's agenda. I want to show you this key verse one more time. Luke 3:4-6. Listen, you will hear a thunderous voice in a lonely wilderness telling you to wake up and get your heart ready for the coming of the Lord Yahweh. That's the second coming. Make straight every twisted thing in your lives. This is for us. Bring into the light every dark thing. Make right every wrong. Remove injustice. Every heart of pride will humbly bow before him. Every deception will be exposed and replaced by the truth to prepare everyone, everywhere to see the truth of God. And finally, Christians should be involved in media, arts, business, government, family, education, religion. We need more believers in these areas and fewer people that don't serve Jesus Christ. We need professors, attorneys, CEOs, CFOs, news anchors, coaches, construction workers, teachers, actors, all of these areas influence every area, every sphere. The people at the top of these mountains, for the most part, now are ungodly. But I'm taking my part back. I said, God, where do you want me to link up? Where is my part in that wall that you want me to stand? I really don't care. I'll stand wherever you want me to because I love you. And then Zechariah 8:3 says, this is what the Lord says, I will return to Zion and dwell in the midst of Jerusalem. Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. It's always been easy to hate and to destroy, but to build and to cherish is much more difficult. But that's what we are to do, to build and cherish our country and everything that we do. It's only when we tell the truth that the world is set free. And I close with this. Eric Metaxas, who is an incredible author who wrote Bonhoeffer so many books, he said this, and I want to think back at how Christians acquiesced. He said this, quote, evil always counts on the silence of the church.